Look at how many workers are involved in a plantation to make sure food gets to your table. That's because you can't see it with the naked eye. I'm talking about microscopic life. Did you know that fungi and bacteria can protect an entire crop, and that there are companies cultivating these microorganisms just for that? Today, we're going to understand how bioinputs are made, which are biological allies made with microorganisms and plant extracts. These products fight pests and stimulate crop growth in a natural way. Let's check it out. When we talk about large plantations of vegetables, greens, or grains, several problems can arise. But there are two main things to worry about. First, the plants have to grow quickly and stay healthy. And second, they can't be attacked by pests or diseases. So what can the farmer do? Maybe the first thing that comes to mind is pesticides and fertilizers. They are chemical solutions made in a laboratory, like medicines to deal with pests and diseases. But these things, if they are used in an exaggerated way, have bad consequences for those who eat them, for the environment, and for the plants themselves. So what we're going to see today is a way to use biology instead of chemistry to protect a crop. For example, if there's a caterpillar eating my corn, couldn't I cultivate a fungus that attacks the caterpillar? If there's a little worm that damages the roots of my soybeans, isn't there a bacteria that can kill this pest? Yes, there is, and we can use these interactions that already exist in nature in a smart way to protect and fertilize the crops. Let's start by looking at this in Curitiba. What companies like Biotrop do is bring these microorganisms to the field. They are products from biological sources, like fungi or bacteria or substances produced by the microorganisms themselves. These products are made to be applied directly to the plants and soil. They don't leave toxic residue, and the risk is much lower for resistant pests or diseases, because they don't use a single mode of attack. It's a varied strategy, a combination of microorganisms that work as a team. While some strengthen and nourish the plants, others control parasites that attack the roots or insects that attack the leaves. And all of this is done here in Curitiba, in one of the advanced centers for microorganism multiplication. Has the largest private microorganism bank in Brazil. There are more than 4,000 types of living beings, mostly fungi and bacteria, which have been collected from various different biomes, from the Amazon to the Caatinga. They stay here, some are ultra-frozen, but others are kept at room temperature. Inside these little vials, where the water was sublimated. In other words, they managed to make the water evaporate by lowering the pressure. And with that, fungi and bacteria can be preserved for over 30 years, and it's with this genetic bank that they create new products. They collect and study these microorganisms, how they live, what they feed on, how they interact, and this information is stored. When they want to produce a new bioinput, they consult this catalog and choose the best combination. And there are plenty of examples. This here is a cucumber plantation, where they are testing fungi and bacteria that can fight the white flea. This tiny little creature stays under the leaf after defining an ideal team of microorganisms. What Biotropia does is optimize their reproduction. So, this isn't a factory, it's a very advanced multiplication center, one of the most modern in the world. Let's follow the production, then, of Bioasis Power, which is made to help plants that suffer from high temperatures and long periods of drought. Its formula contains bacteria that come from arid environments, like the Caatinga, and they help the plants because they can store water close to the roots and increase the reservoir available to them. It all starts in this ultra freezer, where the bacteria are stored in vials at a very low temperature. They are cryopreserved, and the challenge now is to turn these few milliliters into something huge. These microorganisms go into a 200 ml flask. They divide, the population increases, Then they move to a 10-liter flask, they divide again, and the population increases. And then we leave the lab and start the industrial phase. These here are 200-liter bioreactors. Inside, the microorganisms will multiply in an extremely controlled way. Here, they have 12 independent lines. So, you can work with a dozen different fungi and bacteria at the same time, without one part contaminating the other. Everything is controlled remotely. The temperature, the agitation, the nutrients. In other words, the food that the bacteria will receive. As you might have guessed, these microorganisms multiply once again and go into an even larger bioreactor, this time with a capacity of 2,000 liters. At each of these cycles, a sample is taken and sent to the laboratory for quality control. Everything from that batch is tracked. One cool thing is that, besides these microorganisms multiplying, some substances they produce can be useful in the final product. Technically, we call this a metabolite because it's a result of the metabolism of these living beings, LD. And finally, the last multiplication will happen in these gigantic 20,000-liter reactors that take up several floors. We can't see inside the bioreactor, but here in the lab there's an equivalent machine, L. Why are there so many connections up here to control the acidity, the level of dissolved oxygen, carbon dioxide, and how much the machine will stir inside? And what they're doing here is setting all the parameters to figure out the best way to multiply these microorganisms. After they figure it out, they just pass this data onto the industrial side. In the case of Biofertilizers, since it's a mix of microorganisms, several production lines are used at the same time, and the final formula is made in a blender in a 30,000-liter mixer. At Biotropia, they make two types of products, biological and natural. In the biologicals, the cells, the microorganisms, have to stay alive until the moment of application. And here, something really cool happens. Biofertilizers power, for example, can be used up to 36 months after manufacturing. Imagine how much technology and research is needed to keep life inside a product for more than 3 years. Natural products, on the other hand, are those made from plant extracts or from the fermentation of biological products. So they don't need all that care with living cells. And this is where everything is bottled.
Each bioinput is the result of a lot of science and technology, and here we really dive into the science. So, I'm talking here about a molecular biology laboratory where we do DNA sequencing to understand the genetic characteristics of each microorganism. After doing this sequencing, I have thousands of biological data points that still need to be interpreted. So, I have an entire bioinformatics team that will do the modeling, use algorithms, so I can have the interpretation of this biological information. And that's what makes us able to reach this level of technological development. It's very rewarding to bring this to agriculture, and it's no wonder that Brazilian agriculture is a reference in the development of bioinputs in the world.
Look how cool it is! This product doesn't require an agronomic prescription. That means it's so safe for people and the environment. It's like a medicine that doesn't need a prescription. It needs to test all these products that are being developed, and that's what happens at the Advanced Center for New Technologies, Bioracle. This is where much of the science will happen. These bioinputs are used for soybeans, corn, sugarcane, coffee, and even for vegetables, fruits, and legumes. So they have to plant all of this to study what effect their products have after testing them in the lab. There's a second stage, which is done here in the greenhouse in 1 year. They do about 1,200 tests or trials. And look here at what I mentioned at the beginning. This is a caterpillar that attacks the corn cob. So one experiment they're doing here is with a bioinsecticide, which is made from fungi. The fungi produce a substance that attacks this caterpillar. And yes, to do this test, they need to have the caterpillar here. On this soybean, a product is being tested against nematodes, which are those little worms I mentioned at the beginning that attack the soybean's roots. And the idea here is to use a bacterium, plus another fungal metabolite, plus another substance generated from fungi. And then, once again, you'll have to have the nematode in the root and compare it with soybeans that didn't receive this bioinput to see if there's any difference. Another cool example that we found here in the soybean root. These nodules are caused by bacteria that help the soybean fix nitrogen in the soil. Leguminous plants like soybeans and beans are able to take nitrogen from the atmosphere and put it in the soil in a way that other plants can use. And by using a bioinput, You can make leguminous plants produce more nitrogen. This power has already gone through all these tests. It's been thoroughly proven to work. Here is a demonstration of soybeans with and without the product. Look at the difference it makes in the roots, the control plant. And with Bioazzi's power, same thing here, but with corn, without Bioazzi's power, with Bioazzi's power. Throughout the year, many different species will be tested here and at other research institutions to prove the effectiveness. This is a requirement for the products to be registered with the Ministry of Agriculture and other agencies. During cultivation, the plants are monitored to see if their development matches what they expected, and they take samples to analyze in the laboratory. This helps to understand if they need to improve the formula of the product being applied in any way. That's why Bioracle is always in contact with the Multiplication Center over in Curitiba. In the end, we can't forget that they're dealing with a living product that needs to be taken care of. Many clients come here to see how the products work, especially the innovations that haven't hit the market yet, because here, the evaluations and tests are done in practice, not just in the laboratory. Once the greenhouse stage is finished, the tests are done here, outdoors, in conditions much more similar to what the farmer will actually encounter. Here, for example, we have a plant extract, an extract made from plants that is being tested to control a fungus that attacks watermelon. You hadn't realized it was a watermelon crop. You thought it grew on trees. At the start of the video, I joked about many people working in these fields to introduce the topic of microorganisms. But now you can see that, yes, there are a lot of people working behind the scenes of the food we put on our table every day: grains, vegetables, fruits, and legumes. Not to mention the products we use elsewhere, like car fuel, for example, which can come from sugar cane or corn, or the clothes we wear, which can come from cotton. Agribusiness is changing with biologicals. In 2025, Biotrope alone treated more than 51 million hectares with biological and natural technologies. These guys work with a real team of microorganisms, using science to develop modern and sustainable agriculture that uses nature itself to protect and nourish plants. So now, you are watching, fill your plate with vegetables to be as healthy as a crop like this, grown with biological inputs.